Everyone. So, in our earlier videos, you have seen I have given you the gist of summary of Julius Caesar, and now this time it is a summary, not exactly summary, but a story in brief about the most renowned play and which 10th icse they are studying, The Merchant of Venice. The characters we have Antonio, Bassanio, Shylock, Portia, Jessica, Lorenzo, Graciano, Nerissa, and Celerio. Okay, so we'll get start to the story. The Merchant of Venice. Long ago, the city of Venice in Italy was one of the richest in the world, and its people lived in great style. Among the wealthiest of its merchants was Antonio, whose riches were in the form of merchandise that was carried over the seas in fleets of ships. Antonio was a kind and generous person, always ready to help those in trouble. He was, above all, a good friend. Closest to Antonio was Bassanio, a handsome young nobleman who spent rather more than he should have done, and who knew that Antonio could always be depended upon to help him out of his debts. Antonio had only one enemy in Venice, Shylock the Jew, who lent money to Christian merchants at very high rates of interest, and was known to be cunning, merciless, and greedy. Bassanio seeks Antonio's help. One day Bassanio came to his friend with a request. "There is a lady in Belmont," he said, "whom I wish to marry. Her name is Portia, and she is as beautiful as she is rich. But I dare not speak to her about my love for her, because I am poor. Rich and noble suitors surround her, men of wealth and rank with whom I can hardly compete. Antonio, if only I could be accepted at Belmont on an equal footing with this man, I'm sure she would accept my proposal of marriage. At present, all my money is bound up in my ships which are at sea," replied Antonio. "But go into the city and see if on my credit you can get a loan from anyone. I too will do all I can to see if we can arrange enough money so that you can journey to Belmont to marry the rich heiress." Now we have Shylock. The moneylender to whom Bassanio applied for a loan was Shylock. When Bassanio asked him for 3,000 ducats to be repaid after 3 months, Shylock hesitated. Then he said, "Antonio is a good man." "Have you heard anyone deny that?" demanded Bassanio angrily. No, I merely mean that he is a good man to stand surety because he is rich," Shylock said hastily. He added, "I do not doubt that Antonio has wealth, but most of it is on the high seas, bound for Tripoli in North Africa, for the Indies, oceans away, for Mexico in South America, for England and elsewhere. Ships have been known to sink and to have been plundered by pirates. Still, I suppose that you are right and that Antonio is a safe man. Very well," Shylock concluded. "If he will sign a bond for the money, he may have it from me." At this point, Antonio appeared to confirm what his friend had said. But the moment Shylock saw Antonio, his hatred for the Christian merchant revived, and he wondered how he could plot to trap him. He hated Antonio for several reasons. By lending money without interest to those in need, Antonio brought down the rates of interest in Venice, and so damaged Shylock's business. Secondly, Antonio was a Christian, and he scarcely met the Jew on the Rialto or exchange without calling him evil, names like dog and cur, and even spitting upon Shylock's long coat. So he said, "Antonio, you have often flung abuses at me and called me dog and cur, taunted me with charging high rates of interest and dealing harshly with my debtors. All this I have borne patiently, for patience is the badge of the Jews. But now that you need my help and have come to me for a favor, I might say, can a dog lend money? Is it possible for a cur to have 3,000 ducats?" Antonio answered arrogantly, "If you lend me money, do it as a matter of business, not as a favor. For I am your enemy, and will never be your friend. Drive as hard a bargain with me as you please. Your money would be repaid at your rates of interest. Why, look how angry you get, said Shiloh. I would like to be friends with you and forget the insults you have thrown my way. To prove myself, I will lend you the money and will not take any interest on it either, he offered. And now, the nail and the coffin, that is, the pound of flesh. This was unusual, and Antonio should have been on his guard, but Shylock seemed to be in high spirits as he went on. For sport, just a matter of fun, let us make an agreement before a notary that if you do not pay me back the money on a certain day, you will forfeit a pound of flesh that I may cut from any part of your body that I choose. Faith, I will sign such a bond and still say that the Jew has kindness in him, said Antony. But Bassanio was not at all happy with the terms of the bond. I will not let you sign the bond for me, he protested loudly. But Antonio laughed away his friend's fears. My ships will home long before that date, he said. You have nothing to worry about. And he signed what Shylock described as a merry bond. Meanwhile, Lady Portia was preparing to receive her suitors. She was rather spoiled, for she was given to poking fun at the many men who wished to marry her. However, she had reason to be sad about one thing: she could not marry as she chose. She was bound by the strange terms of her father's will. Behind the rich curtains of a splendid home at Belmont were 3 caskets, one of gold, one of silver, and one of lead. Whoever came courting her and had to choose one of this and abide by the conditions of Portia's father's will. If he chose the right casket, he got Portia. If he lost, he had to go away forever and never trouble her or any other woman again with a proposal of marriage. Many suitors came to woo Portia, each more well-known, richer than the other. Among them were the Prince of Morocco, the Neapolitan prince, a Scottish lord, noblemen from France, Italy, and Germany. Portia liked no one, and neither were they able to make the right choice. When confronted with the caskets, the Prince of Morocco had read the inscriptions that guided those who chose the casket. The gold one read, "Who chooses me shall gain what many men desire." On the silver casket, the words inscribed, "Who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves." And on the third, the leaden casket, "Who chooses me must give and hazard all he has." The Prince of Morocco had considered all 3 and decided to open the golden casket. He reasoned that as many men desired Portia, this must be the right one. But when he opened the casket, he found an empty skull. Portia was greatly relieved to see him go. The Prince of Aragon had chosen the silver casket because in a self-important way he thought that he deserved a great deal. But on lifting the lid, he found the portrait of a fool's head, and he knew that he had failed. Gloomily, he too went away. The only person among her suitors whom Portia had liked was Bassanio. They had met when her father was alive, yet she could not marry him till he chose the right casket and earned her hand. "Wait for a few days before you make your choice," Portia told him. "For if you guess wrongly, I must lose your company. I wish I could teach you to choose the right casket, but I have sworn to play fair, so I may not tell you." "Let me make my choice now," replied Bassanio. "The longer I wait, the more tortured I feel." "Tortured?" asked Portia. "Yes, I am tortured by the fear that I may choose wrongly and lose you." "Very well, choose now." Then she instructed her servants, "Let everyone stand back as he chooses, let the music play." Bassanio weighed the captions of the gold, silver casket and promptly set them aside. Then he read the inscriptions of the leaden casket. "Who chooses he must give and hazard all he has." Bassanio was in love with Portia and was ready to make sacrifices for the woman he loved. The inscription seemed to reflect his love for her. He placed his hand upon the leaden casket and lifted the lid, and there the lovely portrait of Portia made him to confirm that he had chosen wisely. Both Portia and Bassanio were overjoyed and immediately began to make plans for their wedding. Bassanio's friend who had accompanied him to Belmont had earlier declared his love for Nerissa, Portia's lady-in-waiting. She had told him she would accept his proposal only if Bassanio and Portia were to get married. Now that this marriage had become a certainty, Graciano once again asked for Nerissa's hand. She accepted him, and it was decided that the two couples would be married at the same time. News from Venice. Meanwhile, in Venice, Shylock's daughter Jessica had run away from her father's house. She was in love with Lorenzo and wished to marry him, but Shylock would not consent to her marriage, as Lorenzo was a Christian and a friend of Antonio. One night, gathering as much money and as many jewels as she could, Jessica had left her father's house and ran away with Lorenzo. They had left Venice with the intention of getting married. Shylock was beside himself with rage. He was perhaps more disturbed by the loss of his wealth than by the loss of his daughter. Since Lorenzo was a friend of Antonio, Shylock's hatred for Antonio grew even stronger. When Jessica and Lorenzo were running away from Venice, they met Salerio, friend of Antonio, who was going to Belmont with a letter. This letter was from Antonio and was meant for Bassanio. Salerio persuaded the two lovers to accompany him. On reaching Portia's house, Salerio immediately handed the letter to Bassanio. Antonio in trouble. Portia watched Bassanio read the letter and turned pale. When she asked him the reason, he replied, "Sweet Portia, here are some of the saddest words that were ever written. You may know, dear lady, for I have never hidden the truth from you, that I am a poor man. I have no money of my own, but things are even worse than that. For I am in debt to Antonio to the extent of 3,000 ducats. This money he borrowed for me so that I should be able to come here and woo you." Portia listened, but what she heard did not alter her feelings for Bassanio. He went on, "Antonio has now written to tell me that all his ships have been lost, that his creditors were asking for payment, and that his bond to Jew stands forfeited. All that Antonio now asks is to see me before he dies. I must go to him." Portia thus learnt of Antonio's bond to Shylock. "It is only 3,000 ducats that he owes the Jew," she cried. "If you marry me at once, all my wealth becomes yours. You can pay his debt several times over. You may then bring your friend home to me." But Bassanio, who had always worried about the terms of the bond, told her that in all probability the money would not satisfy Shylock. "He is insisting," said Bassanio, "on the precise terms of his bond. He wants a pound of Antonio's flesh, nothing else. The Duke of Venice and all the most important men of the city have tried to reason with him, but he will not listen to them. He says that he must and will have justice because his bond is legal." Portia was both clever and practical. She took Bassanio with her to church, and they were married. Now Bassanio was no longer a poor man, and he could go with all haste to Venice to see how he could help Antonio with the large amount of money that Portia had placed at his disposal. The trial scene. When Bassanio reached Venice, the trial had already begun. Shylock showed no mercy, even though the Duke asked him to have pity and forgo the forfeiture. "I want justice. I hate Antonio and will have my revenge," he said. "Do all men kill the things they do not love?" asked Bassanio. "No one can make the Jew change his mind. Let the sentence be pronounced." But Bassanio would not give up easily. "For your 3,000 ducats, I offer you 6,000. He said. "If every ducat of your 6,000 were another 6, I would still not accept. I want my bond honored." Antonio gets a lawyer. At this point, a young clerk entered the court and presented a letter from Bellario, the learned lawyer who, it was hoped, would agree to plead Antonio's case. Antonio's supporters read the contents of Bellario's letter with mixed feeling. "I am ill," Bellario wrote, "and cannot come. But in my place, I am sending a young doctor of law from Rome. His name is Balthazar. We have discussed the case together, and he knows my opinion. I beg that you will allow him to plead in my place. Please do not think poorly of him because he is young, for I have rarely met anyone wiser in law than this young man." Presently, the young man came in, attended by the clerk who had been sent out to fetch him. No one in court would have known who these two young men were, but it was not so difficult for us to guess their identity. Portia had always been clever, and she now had something to fight for using her exceptional wits. When Bassanio had left for Venice, she had thought hard about how she could help her husband and his friend, Antonio. Because she loved Bassanio, and also because she was deeply impressed by the quality of Antonio's friendship for her husband, she was determined to save him. She knew Bellario, and she also knew that the Duke would certainly have called upon Bellario for help. So she wrote to Bellario outlining the case and asking for his legal advice. She also begged him to send her the red robes normally worn by counsellor in court. Bellario, who had known Lady Portia for some time and had every reason to respect her skill, agreed to the request. She appeared to see a gleam of hope, a legal loophole within the terms of criminal bond, and this she discussed further with Bellario. Then, having obtained all the help she required, she dressed herself as a counsellor and Nerissa, her companion, as a lawyer's clerk. Together they appeared at Venice, just as Antonio's case was about to be opened in the court. Portia, or Dr. Balthazar, as the court knew her, began by impressing everyone with his impartiality and clarity of mind. She identified Antonio and Shylock. She had mastered her brief, as lawyers call it, and no one could fault her on the details of the bond. She addressed herself to Shylock and asked him to show some mercy. "Why should I?" asked Shylock. Then Portia made a fine speech on the quality of mercy. "It drops like gentle rain from heaven, and it is twice blessed because it blesses those who are merciful as well as those who receive mercy. It suits a king more than his golden crown, and when justice is tempered with mercy, it comes closest to being similar to the justice of God. So, Jew, now reconsider your demand for a pound of flesh." But Shylock only said, "Let him forfeit the bond." Portia patiently asked him to take 3 times the sum owed to him, but Shylock refused. She then said, "Lawfully, the Jew can claim his pound of flesh, according to the bond. So prepare your knife, Shylock." Shylock was overjoyed. "O noble judge," he cried, "a Daniel has come to judgment." Portia knew the content of the bond well enough, but she now asked in open court to see it, and the Jew readily showed it to her. "This bond is forfeit," said Portia clearly, "and according to it, the Jew may claim a pound of flesh to be cut off nearest Antonio's heart." Once again she turned to Shylock and advised him to be merciful. By now Shylock was weary of their pleading. "I will not change my mind. Let us proceed and have the judgment." Now, apparently without hope, Portia turned from him to Antonio. "You must prepare your bosom for the knife," she said, and Shylock became exultant again, crying, "O noble judge, O excellent young man!" "You have the scales?" asked Portia. "Yes," said Shylock as he lifted them up. "Have you made arrangements for a surgeon lest Antonio should bleed to death?" "It is not in the bond," Shylock replied. "But out of charity," urged Portia. Again Shylock was adamant. No such provision had been made in the bond. With great dignity now, Antonio began to say goodbye to his friend Bassanio. He was in fact weary of life. He had endured so much, and he knew now to die. There was general sympathy for him. There seemed no hope, and since Dr. Balthazar was the picture of blind justice, "A pound of Antonio's flesh is yours," Portia said to Jew. "The law allows this, the court awards it." Shylock grew more and more excited, and Portia went on, "You must cut the flesh from off his breast. The law allows it, and the court awards it." Shylock moved over to his victim, exulting. "Prepare," he cried to the pale Antonio as he lifted his sharp knife. The last minute reprieve. There was a dramatic silence in the court, such as precedes a great event or a great pronouncement. Then a soft voice broke the silence. "Tarry, Jew, there is something else." Everyone was now filled with excitement. "This bond," said Portia, "gives you a pound of flesh. but not one drop of blood. If, in cutting the flesh, you shed one drop of Christian blood, everything that you own will be forfeited by the law to the state of Venice. It was not only Shylock who was startled by this revelation. All Antonio's friends were stirred into the state of frenzied excitement. Imitating Shylock, Gratianona cried, "O learned judge, a Daniel has come to judgment. I thank you, Jew, for teaching me those words." For Portia had indeed found a legal loophole. No one else had seen what was plain to the clever, legal-minded Portia. It was now clear to everyone present that Shylock could not possibly cut off his pound of flesh without shedding blood. To the Jew, too, the logic of Portia's argument was obvious. "Is that the law?" he asked hoarsely. For answer, Portia showed the article. Shylock became peevish and sulky. "Very well," he grumbled. "He would take 3 times the money that he had lent." "No," Portia said. "The Jew would have what he had asked for, justice and his bond." Shylock began to bargain. "He would take only the sum that he had lent." "No," said Portia, "nothing but justice and your bond." Bassanio would willingly have ended the case by paying Shylock the amount of loan, but Portia was now in sole command of the court, and she intended to have the last word. To Shylock she said, "Take your bond, take your pound of flesh, but remember the consequences of shedding a single drop of Christian blood." What was Shylock to do? Portia had totally cornered him. He had thrice refused the offer she had made to him to show mercy and take money. He had refused even to the extent of having a surgeon stand by to prevent Antonio from bleeding to death. As he had asked for justice from his bond, Portia was now determined that he should have justice, no more, no less. Shylock was to have nothing but his bond, not 3 times his capital with interest, not even his capital without interest, nothing but his bond, and this Shylock now dared not take. Portia went a step further. Justice is a 2-edged weapon. Those who insist on it, declining to temper it with mercy, are themselves sometimes the worst sufferers. So was it with Shylock. He had asked for justice and he would have it, but justice would entail his suffering, not Antonio's. So Shylock accepted his defeat and prepared to leave. Portia stopped him, saying, "According to the law of Venice, if anyone who is not a citizen of Venice tries to take the life of a citizen, half his property goes to the person against whom he has committed the crime, and the other half to the state, and his life is in the Duke's hand. Therefore, Jew, you had better get down on your knees and beg mercy of the Duke." Ironically, the man who had rejected mercy was forced to ask for it, but the Duke, losing none of his dignity, said, "That you may know the meaning of mercy, I pardon you your life even before you ask for it. As for your wealth, half by law belongs to Antonio, against whose life you have plotted. The other half goes to the state." Antonio was a better man than Shylock. I do not want Shylock's wealth. If he will agree to leave it at his death to his daughter Jessica, who is married to Christian Lorenzo. Portia addressed Shylock again. "Are you content with this, Jew? If you are, a deed will be drawn up that you can sign." Driven against the wall, Shylock had to be content with this. He said, "I am not well. Send the deed after me and I will sign it." And he turned away. A ruined man, his revenge reduced to nothing, and he, the laughing stock of Venice, he was alone and friendless. Perhaps we ought to pause here to ask if Shylock deserved a fate that could hardly have been pleasant one for anybody. He was certainly guilty of attempted murder. His bond was a criminal document. Even if Antonio was so foolish as to have accepted it and treated it as sport, the fact remained that when Antonio's ships went astray, to demand the fulfillment of a bond as Shylock did was a criminal act. But there is another way to look at Shylock. When a man grows to be an outsider in a society, even such a cultured society as that of Venice, when he is constantly made to feel isolated and persecuted, he develops a terrible, sometimes criminal attitude to his fellow citizens. We know that Antonio often abused Shylock publicly on the Rialto with expressions like dog, cur, without being ashamed of such usage. The fact that Shylock charged very high rates of interest did not justify such treatment. Has not a Jew eyes? Has not a Jew hands, organs, senses, affection? Asked Shylock. If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you wrong us, shall we not be revenged? This was Shylock's point of view, not easy to answer or contradict. Soon Shylock was driven out of court, alone and friendless. The trial was a triumph of Dr. Balthazar. The Duke pressed him, and Bassanio invited the young doctor to dine with him. But Portia excused herself. Antonio was more grateful than he could say. We can never pay you enough, he said, but the strange Dr. Balthazar would accept no payment except a ring which Bassanio wore on his finger. Now, this ring Portia had given to her husband at their wedding, and she had exacted a promise from him that he would never part with it. But now, pressed by Antonius to give it to the doctor to whom he owed his life, Bassanio reluctantly took it from his finger and gave it to Balthazar. Portia hurried home with Nerissa, changed into her own clothes, and was seemingly rested and awaiting her husband, Antonio, and the friends when they finally arrived at Belmont. In due course, she discovered that Bassanio's ring was missing from his hand, and she pretended to be angry. You have given it, she said to another woman. Bassanio protested that this was not so, and the quarrel might have grown more serious had not Antonio intervened to tell Portia what had actually happened. Portia loved drama and crisis. At that point, when it seemed that she was angriest with her husband, she took the ring from her own finger and said, Here now is the ring that you say you gave Dr. Balthazar. He gave it to me. For you see, Balthazar and Portia are one and the same person. Bassanio was speechless with surprise. Were you the lawyer? And I did not know you? He gasped. Portia nodded. Yes, she had been Dr. Balthazar. She had argued Antonio's case. She had fought Shylock and won. And she had made this happy ending possible. Once again, all was well as they heard the laughter of Jessica Lorenzo, who, happily married, had arranged the wedding feast for Portia and Bassanio. In the midst of the feast, the good news came that Antonio's fleet of ships had come home safely, and the merchant of Venice was again the happy and generous man that he had once been. But none of them, not even Jessica, had a thought for the lonely Jew who had been deprived of his pound of flesh, his revenge, and half of his wealth, who lived alone in misery, still more than ever an outsider in Venice. So this was the story of Merchant of Venice. So if you want more stories of William Shakespeare, do let me know in the comment. Till then, take care and don't forget to subscribe and like the channel.